Welcome to this episode of Implementing Best Practice in Business. We are here to help you and your organisation understand and implement global best practice to help you face the business challenges of today. Join me, Richard Pharro, CEO of APMG International, in talking to leaders and practitioners who have applied these frameworks and practices to boost their productivity. They're here, willing to share their knowledge and experience to help you learn from them so you can do the same to make you more competitive in today's market. Today I'm talking to Joseph Lowe. Now Joseph has had an interesting career. He currently works for HM Treasury and he is the editor of the Green Book. So welcome Joseph, and would you like to say a little bit about yourself?
Thank you, Richard. Yes, hello. My name is Joseph Lowe. I've had a fairly long career, most of it not in the civil service. I graduated in economics. Really, I studied political economy in 1970 and subsequently qualified postgraduate statistics. I've worked in the non-ferrous metals industry for a number of years, and then in the gas industry when it was nationalised, then during nationalisation, and then after nationalisation. And then I worked in consultancy for a number of years, working with companies right across the board, from comms and telecoms companies to banks, insurance companies, and people of that sort, very, very big companies around the world. In 2003, I more or less retired from those employments and decided I would like to work in the public sector, really to give something back. And since then, I've been a civil servant since 2006 in the Treasury, where I'm the editor of the Green Book. That's what I do in the Treasury. And the Green Book is really the Treasury's guide to officials on how to work out the best way of doing things that optimises their value for the public.
Thank you very much, Joseph. So with this career in both the public and the private sector, you're very well placed to comment on what you think are the most common problems people face in developing a business case. And why do you think they have those problems? And do you have any top tips for overcoming them?
Yeah, I think the problems stem from two causes. The world is a lot more complicated than we think. And we tend to make assumptions and then act on them. And what usually goes wrong is that people jump in and jump to an end-to-end solution in their mind without taking the problem apart and looking at the different bits of it and building it from the bottom up, as you would a wall or something. And they just assume that they know what the answer is, and all they have to do is devise an implementation plan. And so they jump in, and then all the problems begin to emerge during the implementation phase, which they hadn't foreseen because they jumped to a conclusion. In other words, they retrofitted their design onto a preformed conclusion, and they didn't do proper analysis of the situation. And the world's more complicated than that. Most of the time, very much more complicated, and it's that complexity that catches people out. And it also means that really, while you're thinking about a problem, you don't want to have to think about how do I think about this problem, because you're busy thinking about the issues themselves, and what you need is a ready-made methodology that helps you to know how to break problems down and look at them, and then perhaps sometimes revisit your ideas when you change your view, but do so in a structured way that enables you to bring together different people that you need, different experts, different stakeholders, all of whom can contribute to the solution. But you can't expect one or two people to have all the answers. So it gives you a structure to work with that you can share with others and then devise alternative ways and then pick the best one for achievement of the end that you want to get to.
Joseph, that's a very impassioned plea and request for people to think clearly about the initiative, the project, whatever it is they're considering. So can you think of an example where a really detailed, a thorough business case has identified a completely different solution to what that preconceived idea was?
Yes, I can. I mean, it's not a business case that I was involved with. But it was many years ago now, but it's a very striking example, and it occurred in the nationalised gas provider, British Gas, which had not long been converting the country to North Sea gas as opposed to the old-fashioned towns gas that was made from coal. And it had a major program of conversion of this stuff going on for several years at no cost to the taxpayer. It was a tremendously successful program, wonderful program, achieved very, very successfully with very little notice from people because it was so successful. But at one point in the north of England, there was a feeling that really we needed more short-term gas provision, and we might run out if the winter was very cold. And it was decided to look at a proposal to build a reforming plant which converts oil into gas. And there were a number of these already in operation. And so a full business case and a study was done to look at that. And what was discovered was that there were a number of ways of meeting this potential shortfall, all of which were much more efficient and cheaper than building this reforming plant, which in 2 or 3 years would have been redundant in any case. And those ways were adopted, saving perhaps £80 million at the time, and a wasteful project was in fact avoided, and better solutions were found.
I'm not sure I'd agree with you that the public didn't know what was going on, because if I remember correctly, the roads were dug up and
there were,
the yellow pipes were laid up. And
yes, that's very true. But there was no impact on the exchequer. It didn't cost the public anything. It was financed out of ongoing revenues and profits. And in fact, one of the clever things about it was that by converting the network and joining it up as they did, they more or less doubled the transmission capacity of the immense infrastructure that was already buried in the ground, which added tremendous value to it for years to come, and even enabled instances where you had someone who'd perhaps got an appliance which they loved, a person who'd perhaps had a gas cooker for 30 years, and they didn't want a new one at a discounted price, and it would be the only one in the country, but nevertheless parts would be made for that cooker to convert it at no cost to the consumer. And yet all those costs were absorbed and paid for, and the company remained profitable for the taxpayer. In fact, it delivered considerable sums to the exchequer throughout the years of its existence by the clever application of scientific management techniques such as using business cases.
You've spoken about the value of business cases, but from a business viewpoint, can you really measure the return on investment of a quality business case?
I think you can put several numbers on it and some unquantifiables, just because the world is so complicated. Firstly, there's the actual cost of producing the thing itself. And that's something I frequently need to discuss with people now, even in the public sector. And people who want to get on with a thing will often think, and I had this in the private sector too, look, we know what we want to do, can't we just get on with it? This is back to the retrofitting syndrome. But, remember what the tailors used to say when people went for a bespoke suit or a bespoke dress. And they would not only fit it to you, but when they come to work on their raw material, they would say, measure twice and cut once. And this is, we saw this in Japan with a tremendous boost in the quality of their output compared to Western companies throughout the late 20th century. And Japan was held up as the great masters of total quality. And it wasn't to do with jumping in, it was to do with, measuring twice and cutting once. So there is a benefit that is hard to measure, because you have to say, well, what would have happened had we not done a very careful business case? What kind of mistakes would we have made? So what we call the counterfactual, what would have happened if you'd not done it, is kind of hard to prove. But what you can show is, first of all, what is the cost of producing the actual case itself when you train people and use the method that we have, versus the typical cost of producing a business case with untrained people not using the method. And we did try that we experimented actually with the kind permission of the Welsh Government of the NHS by training and imposing the method quite strictly on much of the Welsh NHS in the late noughties of this century. Mm-hmm. And the result was productivity savings typically of between 30 to 40% in terms of time and money in the cost of production of producing a business case. Now, that wasn't the reason that we were doing it. The reason was to produce a better case, and we got those better cases. We were talking about better results at lower costs, but every case is different. So the return on investment of doing it is, it's been shown that you get better cases. Depending on how well you implement it, each one will be different. But you can also look at your return. In the public sector, the return's a bit different to the private sector. In the private sector, you're looking at the profit bottom line. In the public sector, we have to look at the public's bottom line, because the government's not in this to make money. They're in it to deliver value to the population, and it's public value that we're trying to deliver. But you can measure that by various means. You can estimate it, and that's one of the things that we try to do.
Joseph, if you're able to demonstrate something like a 40% increase in productivity by using trained people to develop a business case, then I'd imagine it's quite easy then to sell the concept to an organisation for the value of training in the development of business cases.
Once they've seen that and they believe it to be true, it is very easy. And usually once they have tried it themselves, it becomes very easy, and they become almost apostles, if you like, for its use, because it frees them up from thinking about, oh, this is a difficult problem, how do I go about it? Because it gives them a thinking structure to work with and a process to go through, and it's a flexible process, it's a scalable process, and they can think about that, and they can just think about the problem itself and not drown in uncertainty, because there's always lots of uncertainty and confusion at the beginning. You just know there's an end you want to achieve, and you're not sure about the detail between where you are and how you get there. And what we do is we try to help people to work out the route from where you are to where you want to be that is the best route.
Joseph, you talk about solving the problems around a business case and thinking about them. Now, the 5-case model, which you've been one of the designers, developers and promoters of, what are those 5 cases that people need to look at in the development of a business case?
Well, they have to know what it is they want to achieve and why they want to do it. And this comes into what we call the strategic dimension of the case. And it starts out from saying, what is your reason for doing this? And concretely express as precisely as you can the 3, 4, 5, up to not too many objectives, maybe 3, maybe 4, maybe 2, could even be just 1, but a small number of key objectives that you can verify you've achieved them or not, and you maybe can express them quantitatively as well. That's ideal if you can, but you've certainly got to be able to verify them and have this been achieved or has it not. Otherwise you're not going to have focus, and then you begin to think about how achieving these things interacts with all the other things that you know you have to conform to, that you want to achieve yourselves as an organisation, and also the constraints you must work within, the legal, the moral, the other constraints that we all exist within society and the economy, and also the things you're depending upon for your proposed solution to work. So nothing exists in a vacuum, and whatever we're doing depends on other things around it being there. And you have to identify what are those things that we're absolutely depending upon being there. Because if we don't think about them, we might find that they're not there in the way we want, or at the time we want, or in the quantity we want. So you get through all that deep strategic thinking early on, and then you proceed into what's been called the economic dimension. Now, if you're in the public sector, this is about trying to work out the value to the public, but it's about much more than that. And if you're in the private sector, it's possibly about your wider goals other than your short-term bottom line. And it could be any one of those. It could be your long-term market share or your long-term profitability or some other strategic goal that you have. But in the private sector, it's public value. And you need methodologies in there that help you to take the problem apart. And that's what we've got. And really deal with its essential elements. You need then to think about what it is you need to buy. Do you have everything you need to do this, or do you need to buy stuff in? More people, new IT systems, hardware, buildings. Does something have to be made for you? and what's the capacity of your potential supply chain to give you what you want, or to sell you what you want and create it for you when you want it. And you need to think about that at a strategic level before you ever think about procurement, because all that determines how you buy something. Is it something freely available or that's bespoke? It's quite a different ballgame. And does it exist already? You're just going to buy it off the shelf. You have to think about that strategically. Then you think about what it's going to cost you, your finances, and what you hope it'll gain for you too. Income and expenditure, your balance sheet, all that's very important. And also how you can manage its creation and its implementation. And if you stop and think about it, it becomes immediately apparent that how you manage it is not only dependent on what it is you have to buy and what it is and what it might cost and what's there already in terms of dependencies and constraints, but that also affects the cost, as does the commercial dimension of what it is you have to buy and so on. So they're all actually meshed together, these 5 dimensions. They're not 5 separate things. That's why when I'm talking about it, I represent it when I'm training people as a pyramid viewed from above, because there are 5 sides on a pyramid, but it's only one pyramid. They're just different ways of looking at it. And that's what you get with the 5 dimensions of the 5 case model. I mean, I didn't develop this thing. I have helped and supported its development. I didn't invent it. I wish I had. I'd be very proud if I had, but somebody else did that. Joe Flanagan. I didn't do that. But I've worked with him since 2007, and together we have refined it and come up with different things. But basically it's his baby.
Joseph, the way you talk about the 5 case model, you clearly see it as a strategic tool. But a lot of people would say, well, that's okay for your industry or that's okay for your project, but that's not going to work here. So do you believe it is genuinely universal, and can it be scaled from the smallest initiative to the largest initiative?
I believe that it is genuinely universal, and I've actually seen it applied for quite modest projects to major issues of public policy. And the reason it's capable of that is that it's couched at a very high level. The people who claim that it's different here usually have not become very familiar with what it really is, and they imagine that it's something that it isn't, and that it's highly detailed and so on. It's not at that level in its essence, the 5 case model. If you think about it, there has to be a rationale for why you do something. There has to be a reason. And that's what the strategic case is about. It's about understanding the current position and the position you want to get to, and how you're going to bridge the gap and why you want to bridge the gap, what exactly you want to get out of it, so that you don't, lose sight when you're halfway through and go wandering off course. It's about establishing all those things and also understanding the environment that you're going to be working within and that this thing has to deliver within, and the constraints that you have to work within, and the things you depend upon that are outside your control. Because if you don't, those things will catch you out. Then, in the so-called economic case, it's really about what you want out of it. Taking those things from the strategic case and saying, now how do we analyse what we're going to get out of this compared to what we're putting into it? How do we know what's going on? And what decisions do we have to make about a number of essential issues? They're decisions about the scope of the thing. How do we put a boundary around it? How big has it got to be? What does it cover? And people often stumble into programs and projects without thinking what the boundary is that they're working within, that they should have set for themselves at the beginning. And then they get scope creep and it all goes hopelessly wrong. So that's part of the economic case, which it takes from the strategic case. But then it looks at how that could be implemented in different ways. And then there's how you actually do it. And then there's who can do it for you, or will you do it yourself, or do you create something new to do it? And then there's how you do it. And then there's what it's going to cost you. And they're all different decisions, but they're all interdependent, just as the 5 case model is interdependent, because the commercial case, what you have to buy, is very, very important, but clearly it's derived from information you're getting in from the economic case and the strategic case about where we want to get to, but the practicalities of getting there, and you want to know, well, what can the supply chain actually deliver? Because that then determines what goes into the so-called economic case when you're looking at how things are done. And then, of course, the finance begins to drop out of these things. Well, it may cost this, it may cost that because of these different options. And the management case, which is about how we develop and how we implement the thing, actually is very dependent upon what you buy, but it also feeds back onto what is most costly to develop and implement, which may influence what you buy in the first place. None of them are capable of being considered independently and then just glued together at the end or balanced off one against the other. They all have to be developed together in a way that constructively feeds into each other. Now, to do that, you need a clear thinking model, which is the 5-case model, and that's explained very simply to people. Take a bit more time than we've got time for now, but I've just given you the outline. And a process that helps you to break the problem down into a series of stages, at each point allowing you to step back if you need to and reconsider what you decided before, if you need to change it, and deal with the complex world we live in. And I've actually seen this thing applied to very simple projects or to very, very large mega problems like how does this small island in the Caribbean deal with the drug trafficking and the gangs problem which it's subjected to in modern conditions now and due to its location in the Caribbean. Very complex problem, involving all kinds of things to do with security, to do with justice, to do with health, to do with education, to do with re-education, to do with support from people who are unfortunate enough to be caught up within it, to do with a wide range of things, very complex. Seen it deal with that very, very helpfully. I've seen it applied to the problem of loneliness in another government jurisdiction, and yet I've also seen it applied to straightforward programs and projects for everyday things that we can all understand. And I've seen it applied in the private sector. Major private sector users, insurance companies, utility providers, commercial companies, purveyors of things as diverse as fizzy drinks and pet food, have used it profitably.
It seems that business cases are an iterative process. You need all the right people in the room to talk about the problem and see how they can solve it.
Absolutely. People are key, as with everything in life. You can have a company where the systems are not perfect, but you've got really wonderful staff who make up for that and sort of glue them together. And you can be in other situations where you've got some wonderful systems, but no one understands them and they're never made to work properly. And the people are absolutely central to this. And the process, the beauty of the process is it helps people who wouldn't normally come together, but who should, in the case of a business case, to come together in a structured way. It gives them a shared language and a shared process and a number of key points in that process when they come together in a workshop setting to share their knowledge and their expertise to generate the solution options and enable then the choice of what is the preferred solution. And that is as much it's about that as anything else. And sometimes preferred solutions are not just the hard bottom line. Sometimes they have to incorporate so-called soft factors, which everyone agrees are nevertheless vital and must be included. And what the system does is it allows for the effect of doing that to be examined and judgment to be made about how much of that you want to do thereby, because it reveals the cost.
But we live in an age of instant gratification. We live in an age where people would say, you can't have a week with my team to develop the business case. So if you were faced with the challenge of only having the team for about half a day, what would you focus on in terms of the 5-case model to get the maximum benefit and to make sure that they're able to then deliver what's necessary without your facilitation or your guidance? What would be that half day spent doing?
I would focus on the early stages of the method and the five dimensions of the model in those stages. In particular, the rationale and smart objectives, and from the strategic dimension, and the use of a thing that we call the framework filter, the options framework filter, to actually consider a wide range of strategic choices, bringing together in a workshop setting all the key stakeholders and experts that you need and the knowledge to get it into the room so that you can look at the issues of scope, the best means of technical delivery, the best agency for making the delivery and running of the thing that you want, the implementation planning of the thing, and the cost of the thing. And it enables you to quickly look this rather clever device, which is based on something called decision theory, which is a branch of operations research. But when people are doing it, they don't know that. It's very logical, very common sense, very illuminating. It just enables all that expert opinion to be structured and captured in a logical sequence of alternative choices from which it's then possible to construct a wide range of short-listed solutions. It, if you like, manufactures the bricks that you can then construct different solutions from. And I would concentrate on that. Obviously, to get that done in half a day or something, you would need to do some preparatory work and get the right people into the room and the briefing and make sure that they brought the research results with them and things like that. But it can be done very, very quickly. In fact, the example I gave of loneliness was done in that way, but by a colleague of mine in another jurisdiction. And the one I gave concerning drug trafficking and gang culture and all that was done by a colleague in a different jurisdiction over 2 afternoons. But they got the right people in the room, very, very high-level people and subject experts. So they had the stakeholders and the experts together, and they could bring the combined forces to bear on the problem in a structured way to see what the alternatives might be. And, of course, these are multi-stranded problems, things like loneliness or drugs and gangs. There's not one simple answer to them, and yet the method can deal with that. So I think that's the thing. It's that early stage, and of course in simpler problems that you might have, then again it's you could deal with it.
Joseph, it's fascinating talking to you. I'm sure we could go on for hours exploring some of the applications of the 5 case model and the value of better business cases. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. We're always keen to hear your feedback and suggestions for future episodes. You can find all the information in the show notes below. Please visit apmg-international.com to find out more about our accredited training and the certifications that support them that are related to the topics discussed in this series. I hope you've enjoyed today, and I look forward to you joining future episodes while we continue our exploration into best practice and the benefits it brings to global business. Thank you.